Hello again guys, welcome to this third video in this tutorial series in Android application development using Kotlin. So in the last video we checked out activity life cycles and we even implemented our activity life cycle and then saw when each and every method of those life cycles would run. Now before going to r.java, I'd like to talk something about intent. In any application you see these transitions from one screen to the other. Imagine you're opening a Facebook application for the very first time. In the first screen you see a Facebook logo splash screen, and then after a certain time it goes to your login screen. So the transition from one screen to the other is actually the transition from one activity to the other, or one fragment to the other. We're only considering activities intent here. So first of all, I'd like to talk to you about intent in activities. So we're going to do something, or we're going to implement something where our screen would change from, or our UI would change from one screen to the other screen. Before going to implementation of intents, I'd like to talk to you about two types of intents. The first is implicit intent and the other is explicit intent. Well, what are the differences? Explicit intent takes place within an application. Here I already have one activity called main activity, and which has a layout here. Imagine I have another activity called maybe a second activity, and which has a new layout there. So now imagine the transition from activity underscore main, or this first layout, to the other layout. The transition actually happens because there is an intent from main activity to that newly created activity back there. So any transition between activities within an application is actually an explicit intent. The other type of intent is implicit intent. Implicit intent is something which is beyond the scope of your application. Suppose you're in your application, you suddenly see a URL link, you just click on it, and what does that do? It just takes you to your default browser, or it goes outside the scope of your application and then opens up your browser. So that kind of intent beyond the scope of your application is an implicit intent. So I think it's very clear. Explicit intents happen within your application, and implicit intents happen beyond the scope of your application. Okay, I'd like to show you one thing here, how explicit intents are called. So explicit intents are called using this action name here. Suppose your browser application, or your default browser application, or your Chrome application in your phone could have a different action name. So if you want to open a browser from your application, then you'd have to call an implicit intent using this action name. I'll show you the implementation of this also, but first of all I'd like to take you to implementation of explicit intent. So let's go. I've created a new application here, a brand new application. Main activity is completely empty except a layout has been embedded. Let's go to the layout. In the layout I have included linear layout here. So the width and height are match parent, and the orientation is vertical, as we have done in the first video too. So let's just go ahead and add a button here. Width is wrap content, height is wrap content. Let me give a text here, then go to second activity, and let me give an ID. This go to second. Okay, this is all we're going to do here. So now what I'm going to do is I'm going to create a new activity in my package here. So I could do this in two ways. The first way is I could just right click on this, new activity, and I could do empty activity. So my second activity, or the new activity, would be called second activity. Okay, so what this does is it not only creates a UI file, but since we've picked out generate layout file too, it creates a new layout file for your activity too. And the source language would be Kotlin, the package would be the same one. Just click on finish. Now what this would do is it would create a new activity here, just as your main activity defined here, with a new layout associated to it. Okay, so we're not going to do anything fancy here. You can just go to activity underscore second, and let's remove this constant layout. I'll not be talking about constant layout right now. I'll go with linear layout right now. So width is match parent, height is also match parent, and an orientation. Let me give it vertical. Now let me close this linear layout here, and before this linear layout ends, let me add a text view here. So text view, add content, wrap content. I can just write the text. This is the second activity, just to see if the transition is successful or not, and just close it. I don't need an ID because I'm not going to use this in my Kotlin class there. So yeah, it's just a small text here. Let me increase the text size though. Let me give it 40 dp. Okay, I think now you can clearly see it, right? So let's go back to our main activity here. Okay, now what we're going to do is we're going to introduce transition from this activity underscore main to activity underscore second. Once we click this button here, go to second activity, what actually happens on the background is the transition happens from main activity to second activity. Now how do I define that? What I can do now here is we have button go to second dot set on click listener. Now inside this click, what I can define is I can define an intent equals to intent. Now I just have to give a context, maybe this would do, and then I will have to write the name of the second class, which is second activity double colon class dot java. Okay, so yeah, this is the syntax. Don't be confused, because you might be confused with like second activity is actually a Kotlin task. Why are we writing Java? Okay, don't worry about that. Just write down Java for now. Okay, and then you can just call start activity intent. Okay, it's done. What I would like to point you out is, as you had noticed in the first video also, we had this Android manifest file where our initial activity was defined as main activity. What you can notice is once we add the second activity, the Android Studio resource already defines the second activity here for us too. Notice the category is not mentioned here because there can be only one activity with a launcher category. Remaining, no matter how many activities you have, those are all going to be in default category. You can even write it down, or like even if you don't write it down, it understands that the second activity is actually a default activity and not a launcher activity. Okay, so now let me run my application once. I have my phone projected here, so I can run my application once and see what happens. Okay, as you can see, the application is running, and yes, this is my application. Now if I click on this button, this should take me to this new layout here. Okay, this new layout here. Let's see if it's successful or not. So go to second activity, let's click, and yes, it goes to the second activity. So we've successfully performed an explicit intent in our application. Okay, let me explain how the explicit intent is actually working there. So the manifest file actually has the list of all the activities that is present in the application. So activity A here refers to main activity, and activity B here refers to second activity. So once a start activity is called and an intent is called, the Android system registers that intent, and then with the help of manifest file it calls on create method of another activity, which is activity B, or the second activity in our case. And that's how explicit intent works. Now we are going to define an implicit intent in this application. Let me go to second activity. I can do it here. So let me just add an edit text here. We already know what an edit text is because we've already used it in our first video. Let me just give a hint. Let's type a URL, okay, and then ID, one ID, so @ plus ID pt URL, and then done with this. Okay, now since we have two UI file and two Kotlin classes, please don't mix up your IDs or your components with these Kotlin classes. This component can only be defined and can only be used in that particular Kotlin class where this layout is being used. So this layout is being used in second activity, so you can only define this component in second activity and not in main activity. If you try to define it in main activity, then that can give you a null pointer exception, which means your object cannot be created there. So here what I'm going to do is I'm first going to extract a string URL from my edit text, which means let me just it's a Java habit. URL equals to okay, I cannot use URL. Let's see. But I can define a URL. So var URL equals to et URL dot again a Java habit text dot to string. Okay, so now you can define implicit intent in this way. Intent equals to intent, and inside this, for browser we specially do intent dot action underscore view, which opens up our browser, and we can set another value here. Now we can set our other value here, which is URI dot parse and then URL. Now we can call our start activity intent. Okay, this is how you define an implicit activity. Remember, in explicit activity you had these two components. These two components can be defined as a source from where your intent is being originated, which means the class main activity here, and then the class where you want the transition to be, that means the second activity. But in case of implicit intent, you define it based on the action name. Like I showed you in the manifest file, the action name is used, and then the data is passed to that action, to that intent, or to that action name to carry out a certain operation. So in this case, we want to open a URL which we have typed here in our browser. So we just called a browser and then passed the URL here, and then an intent has been called. So I can rerun this application again. Let me rerun it, and then I can show you what is happening here. Okay, the application is running. So as you can see, the first screen obviously has a button. Let's go to second activity. Okay, we ran through a crash. Let's see what happened. Let's go to logcat. So no activity to handle intent. Okay, let's see. So we have some kind of error here. Okay, I found the problem. So once your second activity starts, it immediately executes this command, When it does not find anything, it executes this command, and then it goes on executing this command. So I think we're missing a button there, so let's add a button after our edit text. So let's add a button. Width is wrapped content, or height can be wrapped content id. Let's do btn submit, and then let's give a text submit here. So okay, this is done. Now if you want to see the screen, you have the view here, the first view here, okay, text view, and then an edit text where you are supposed to type the URL, and then a submit button to actually start the intent. So sorry guys, I missed the process of starting the intent there. So let me not define it here, but what, okay, I'll actually remove that later on, but first I'd like to define a click on that submit button. So btn submit dot set on click listener, and inside this I'm going to implement these things, so that these three statements they run only once the button is clicked and not at the beginning. Okay, sorry for the confusion. So let's run the application again. Okay, as you can see, the application is installing and it's running. So let me go to second activity and so on. Okay, we are on second activity. So now we can type a URL here. So let me give http colon slash google dot something is wrong with my phone. Whenever I connect the data cable, it just behaves very randomly, or like, okay, now I can just hit submit, and this should take my intent browser, and here it is. So there are two different applications, as you can see here. One is a browser and one is a Kotlin application. So okay, we have successfully performed an explicit intent and implicit intent in both of our files. So I think you understood the concept of intent. I'd like to end this video here, and in the upcoming video, as I promised, I'm going to talk to you about r.java. So thank you for joining in, thank you for doing this together with me. I plan to do this almost daily now, so yeah, do subscribe to the channel and then hit that bell icon to not miss any update and continue learning. Thank you.